Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming to check out our live Q&A. I'd like to welcome Mike Sobo. Mike is an award-winning commercial editor who's cut spots for major brands like Cadillac, Nike, ESPN, Disney, NBA, Coach, American Express, and Chevrolet. A graduate of NYU Film School, he's worked on campaigns with famed directors such as Lena Dunham, Spike Lee, and Zack Snyder. Currently working for the New York City-based creative editorial shop Uppercut, Mike's one of the foremost experts in music and advertising. Mike, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to Symphonic's Q&A session called Making the Cut.
Thanks for having me, John.
Do you appreciate the double entendre?
I missed the double entendre. Say it again.
Making the cut.
Oh, and I'm an editor.
Okay, so I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So editors are not necessarily responsible for providing the soundtrack for commercial, but they have a unique influence on what music ultimately gets cut into the spot. Can you speak a bit about how the process works when working on a spot where the music is not yet defined?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, when a commercial comes to me, it's usually been, it's always been shot almost entirely, although sometimes I get involved earlier in the process. But I would say 80% of the time, music is not predefined for me. So that means I'm at sort of the unique nexus point between the director of the spot, the agency, the brand, and then my own personal taste, which certainly would come into play. And so a lot of times the people at the agency, the directors, or people I've worked with before, I know their taste, but all the same, when something comes to me, almost the first question I ask to the director or to the agency is, what are you thinking for music? And a lot of times they don't really know, they'll either give me descriptors, something, up tempo, something, dramatic, something with a build. It's all relatively, I'd say directors usually will be the ones to send you a song, but it's usually like a song by a huge artist that they know they'll never be able to afford. So it's usually that's like a starting point. And then from there, I'm putting stuff together. The agency also might send me a few tracks they're thinking about. A lot of times agencies, the creatives there are young people who also, are really into music. And so they want to get bands they like into spots that they are making. So they'll send me a few tracks and then, I kind of process what everyone's telling me. And then usually I'll come up with some of my own. So by the time I'm showing the director, first cuts, by the time I'm showing the agency, I typically will have, a favorite I'll focus my energy on making, but almost always I'll take a few of the other suggestions and sort of tweak the edit based on those songs so that, when we all sit down and look at it together to get our first round of notes, first round of feedback, we're getting a few different looks. We're seeing how, different songs will, play with different elements of the commercial. And, the truth is, even from there, things can change wildly. Your picture of where things start can be.
Yeah, you get kind of the first crack at it and you get to sort of weigh in your own opinion, but even within your own opinion, you're trying to please other people. And you're ultimately trying to get them to like the cut that you make so that you don't have to keep doing it over and over again, I would imagine.
Right. Well, that is true. It's like when I cut a spot, I'm trying to, make it as cool as possible so that I don't have to redo it a few times.
Right. Your ideal thing is that you show it to them. They're like, great.
Yeah, this is great. Can't wait to sell it to the brand. And, I think there's usually, when it comes to music, there's usually this sort of conflict going on between brands, what a brand wants, and then what the director and the agency want. And you want them to be aligned, but typically, brands want to spend as little money as possible on their ads, and agencies want to use the coolest, most talked about things they can think of. And so
Is
there's
that because agencies want to win awards? Is that kind of like the thing where they're trying to make the coolest work that they can put on their reel or whatever to like
all
make
of
it?
that. Yeah, of
Yeah, yeah.
course. I mean, me too. Sure, if I can use like, my favorite song on something because it's awesome and it's going to have people talking about, that spot with that awesome song, I'm going to do that. But that's not always possible. or the sort of most sometimes difficult thing is when you start a spot and they say, we have money for library music, and which is fine. I mean, there's plenty of good library music out there, but you're not going to get that sort of cultural cachet that you'd get from using, something, even if it's a small band, that band's going to have fans and,
Right. So actually, that perfectly segues into my second question. Can you speak a bit about the different types of music that's used in advertising and where it's usually sourced from? So you mentioned library music, obviously. We all know about like bands and things like that, and we all know about famous artists. But in terms of like I think you alluded to this also by saying that the client, the brand wants to spend as little money as possible. So like, can you speak about the different types of music, what the general most expensive to least expensive, and like why one thing is used over another and where it comes from?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there's library music and composed music and then sync, and library obviously is the least expensive, and sometimes that just works. Sometimes like a spot's not calling for a famous song, or a spot's not calling for something that calls attention to itself. It just needs a little bit of a rhythm behind it to give it energy, but it doesn't, music isn't the basis of what makes the spot. And then once you get out of that sort of library realm, right? If a brand wants to put money into music because it's that type of brand, there are lots of different brands. A lot of times you're going to be using library music on a pharmaceutical ad, but you're not going to typically use library music on a Nike ad. They are very particular. I mean, Nike has music supervisors. They have people who sort of guard their brand and make sure that
Right.
that their music lives up to Nike standards or whatever. I'll just
And
give
those brands are
example.
like those brands are like they're culture brands, right? So
Right.
they're trying to be influential in culture.
Exactly. But like, I'll give you an example of like a spot I worked on, a Nike spot I did, where originally, it was a spot for Kevin Durant, and it aired right after the second time he won the championship with the Golden State Warriors. And it was, to sort of prop him up. And, there was a lot of, he, first of all, he has friends who are famous hip hop artists. So, there was a lot of push to, get like Kendrick Lamar in there, or get something like that. And Nike was sort of open to whatever. They were, they have that kind of power to do whatever. And we tried. This was one of the times when, I didn't nail it with music at the beginning, and it really, I would say probably to the very end, we were still trying different pieces of music, and really whatever I wanted was open to me.
Sometimes that's the worst.
What?
Sometimes that's the worst.
Well,
Because if they don't give you parameters, it could be anything, and then everybody has their opinion on what it's supposed to be.
Right. Well, what ended up happening is we used a piece of composed music. We
Right.
had the ability to use, super famous sync music, and we ended up finding this, this piece of composed music. I mean, I'm sure it had been composed previously by the composition company who tweaked it for us, but
Mhm.
it worked perfect for the spot. It had these like gospel elements to it. And I think we came to that through I don't remember what it was, but a different hip hop track that had gospel elements, but the energy of the track, was a bit low. You know, what the problem with not problem, but what I encounter with hip hop a lot is the energy comes from the vocals and not the
Right.
backing track.
Yeah.
So you
Not a lot of dynamics. It's usually very, very linear.
right, exactly. There's not a lot of build. It's you know, just a beat. But that gospel element in that one more, I can't remember what it was, but you know, one more famous track led us to this, you know, to try something that had sort of a gospel element to it, and it worked great. And that, you know, ended up being the spot. But you know, it can work a lot of different ways too. It's like, you know, when you are using composed music, it, you know, what usually happens is there's like 2 or 3 companies that you're the agency's paying to send demos, and then, you know, whoever nails it gets the payday or whatever. And then, you know, that they'll send some library music too. But even when you have like the budget for big licensed music, it can still be a very like, you know, what do we do with this now? You know, how do we spend all this money? I can tell another story where I did a Cadillac spot. It was for the Oscars. And it was at the time, I believe the CMO, it was a new CMO at Cadillac. And her first spot we had just finished with the agency. The CMO had come from McDonald's. The first spot, this was one of the times when, before we ever started the edit,
Sorry, CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, correct?
Sure. Yeah. Chief Marketing Officer. The Cadillac spot I had done before that, they had purchased Bang Bang by Ariana Grande and Jessie J. And, you know, they just said, here, we're making a spot with this. And it was pretty cheesy. I mean, that sounds like pretty like in your face and cheesy. And of course, there's a line that goes, she's got a booty like a Cadillac. And we had to put that in. I mean, it was something. So then we get to the Oscars, and I think the agency really wanted to avoid, like, they could use whatever they wanted. And the CMO, this woman who came from McDonald's, was really like, you know, we're a music brand now. We use really good music, you know, or well-known music in our ads. And so you had this sort of battle between her, who wanted to use like as big of a thing as she could possibly find, you know, biggest hit she can put in there, and the agency, who wanted to use, you know, a well-known track, but wanted to give it some kind of cool because it was for the Oscars. And the track we really wanted to put in there was Me and Your Mama by Childish Gambino, which is what ended up in there. But it was a battle with the CMO, who was like, sort of at the time was like, is he really famous enough? Is this really what we want to do with our brand? And then like 2 weeks before the Oscars, he won, you know, every Grammy for This Is America. And that's when she finally said, okay, fine, you can use Childish Gambino in your Oscar spot. But that gives you some thinking of like the disconnect between like where brands sometimes are at and where agencies sometimes are at.
Yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting because I feel like it's hard to measure what, you know, obviously if the sky's the limit, you know, you go as big as you can. But if the sky's not the limit and they're limited, I'm always curious as to what types of things, you know, really add value to the spot, aside from it working creatively. You know, like you said, you know, the tie-in to an artist winning a bunch of Grammys is important because it increases the cachet. That's really hard to define because it's subjective, and you know, whether the brand cares about somebody winning Grammys or not, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, but even with like much smaller bands, it's like, you know, you always love when you put, you know, a well-placed song in an ad and you see in the YouTube comments, like, what is this track? I need to find out what this track is called. Like, I feel like brands are very smart when they can do stuff like that because it sort of like ties them in with a sort of cool that maybe they don't deserve, but they earn by paying that smaller artist money.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that those opportunities are not for televised spots. Those opportunities are hard to come by for independent artists, but there are a handful of brands that pretty much exclusively use up and coming unknown artists, and it's part of their brand to be like music discovery channels, things like that. Like, oh, did you see the new Apple brand or whatever it is?
Right.
The new Apple spot. Obviously we love those. I've always wondered a little bit why more don't do it, but I think, like you said, it comes down to we have all this money we can spend to get like the most famous artists in the world, to sort of be our spokesperson, for lack of a better term, and it kind of comes down to how big can we go with this.
Right.
So I feel like there's probably a lot of library and like a lot of like really famous stuff, and like a little bit less in the middle, but hopefully that's something that grows.
Well, there's less in the middle, but I would say, like, generally speaking, agencies and directors and editors, I mean, everyone who's not the brand or the money people at the agency are trying to get real music in there,
Right.
real bands, because they know it just adds an element of, like, it gives another thing to talk about. And it just, it goes to and I think, like, for even I remember a spot where you had a placement in one of my ads, John, where there was a certain budget. It wasn't great, but it was like high for library music and low for sync music. And
Yeah.
The agency was like, well, if we want to give our money to somebody, let's give it to a real,
Right.
let's give it to a band. And
I think as a sync rep, I'm always conflicted because I know how much money goes to bands. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, like, just to throw like dummy numbers up there, like an unknown band could easily get $50,000 to $100,000 for a televised spot,
sure.
if they have it in the budget. But if they don't have it in the budget, and if they're budgeting for library music, and like the music that they've been looking for previously was $5,000, and that's all they have, and it's the exact same spot, but they're totally prepared and happy to use library music, they're still going to be a band that's very, very excited to get a spot on TV and get $5,000 and get performance royalties for their, for it airing all over TV, and the cachet that comes with it. So, it's always kind of conflicting because these numbers are as much tied to, all of these different aspects that are weighed, to figure out what the fee is, as much as it is just like, what was their starting budget, or how much is the brand prepared to
honestly spend? I mean, that's how, the dirty secret of advertising is that's how everyone works. It's like, when a company comes to me to use my services, it's like there's no set rate. It's like,
how much you got?
The budget for editing, with this brand is going to be a lot higher than with this brand, and that has more to do with the brand than it does for how much it costs to use our services.
Yeah. To go back to the question, so and again, to preface that it's not really your responsibility to source the music, but in some cases you're also using resources either from Uppercut or from your own personal whatever, from the agency. Where does the music come from typically? What are the types of companies, or do you get stuff directly from artists? Do you find stuff on your own?
Where does it? I mean, Spotify. It comes from. I mean, it's YouTube. Where does stuff come from? It's like, yeah, it's nice when I'm working with like someone like you who will send me music, but it's tough to sort through like who's gonna have the right thing. And sometimes the agency will have preferred vendors, and so then I'm limited to we're already working with these three companies. They're gonna send us real music, they're gonna send us some library music, and they're gonna send us some composed music. And that is kind of what it is. Other times it's like, and I would say this is the over 50% of what I work on, it's like there's no parameters when it hits my desk, and I have, like, as I said, descriptors of what they want in music, but not actual
You have a brief.
yeah, I have a brief, exactly. And sometimes I bring that brief to you or people like you, and other times, I would say a lot of times,
Right.
I just go to like playlists that I've populated
Right.
with songs I like that I think would work good in ads, and start listening through them. And
one of the reasons I wanted to have Mike, again, Mike is not a music industry executive. Like, it's not like he's not working in the music industry, but he, again, has a very unique kind of perspective on this, because he's kind of the first person in this apparently very long chain of decision makers. But he gets to plant the idea in people's heads. It's a concept called demo love that is very common in the ad industry, where whatever the spot is first, if it works, if they decide that, so just an example, if he puts, a cool indie song in there that's like totally clearable, but for some reason it's not exactly what they want and they want to go with something else. Now the brief is actually based on Mike's pick. So, and then they may take it back to the agency. The agency might actually outsource the music to a bunch of music houses. They may send a brief out to all their contacts. I may have pitched Mike the initial song that became the brief, and then it may go with the agency, and the agency might work with a third-party music supervisor who might send me a brief based on the song that I pitched, and then to replace my own song. And that's literally happened to me in the past, where I've seen the song that was being considered for the spot that actually becomes a reference in the brief that I have to now try to beat my own song. So it's kind of this interesting position, only because I think that depending on what direction Mike goes in has a huge effect on the direction musically of where the spot goes. Now he doesn't get the end. He doesn't get the final decision as to what music gets used, but he has a lot of influence on the process.
yeah, and I would say, like, I mean, I don't know what the percentages are. I couldn't tell you, but I'd say at least a third of, I mean, I could say like at least a third of spots that I work on that don't have music at the beginning have ended up either using the music that I picked, or using music, based on the, the song, the more
Music
popular
like
song.
the music that you picked.
Right, exactly.
The
So,
cheaper or more expensive version of the music that you picked.
yeah, usually cheaper, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let me go on to the next question. So as an editor, what elements do you personally listen to in a song that makes it work well for advertising? So what types of things within a song, be it dynamics or whatever it is, are sort of attracted to you that you look at, when you're looking at music?
So yeah, I mean, what everyone likes when they listen to music, a great beat and a catchy hook, are important. I would say for cutting ads, for cutting 30 or 60-second spots, I'm listening for a build, or the ability to create a build, whether I'm cutting taking it the first 10 seconds and cutting out the next 30 and throwing it together, or the ability to make a build. A lot of times I would love there to be like a natural break in a track. I don't always use that, but it's a very it's an editing technique that gets used a lot if you pay attention, where like you'll have like a build up and then the music comes to a stop to create some sort of dramatic effect, and then it continues on. And if a song has that naturally built in, it just always works better than me trying to create it or something. And let's see what else. A definitive beginning and end is always important. Again, you can.
And are you also are you thinking in terms of lyrics and things like that, or are you really just kind of pulling ideas from the structure of the song instrumentally?
Well, and yeah, I was gonna say, so like in terms of lyrics, that's where things get, can either get tricky or not. But like lyrics are always difficult. It's like you find a song with like one lyric that really works for you, then great. But like I would say most of the time you're not going to want the lyrics, or if you do, you're just going to want like that piece of it. Lyrics can get tricky. It's they don't say exactly what you want them to say, or
Right.
you know, so like repetitive lyrics are always good. You know, the opposite example of that is like when a spot is built around a song. Like if a spot is built for a particular lyric song, then you know, you
Work.
approach it from the other direction, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So it's interesting. So again, you're working within like a 30-second medium, roughly, like
right.
sometimes less, but like a very short medium. And you're either taking a song and chopping it up into bits and remixing it, or you're taking a song and you're taking the footage and you're chopping it up into bits and trying to make it work around the song.
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, really both.
Yeah.
It's rare that I never take, you know, a 30-second chunk from the song and just plop it down on my timeline and cut to that. It's,
Right.
you know, usually my process for editing usually starts with sound and music. I'll usually take a song and, you know, that I think, you know, I'll picture what I want to do visually in my head. I'll sort of have an idea of where I'm going to go with it visually, but then I build with the song. Like I'll take the song, I'll, you know, find the beginning. I'll think to myself, okay, that first section in my head can take 6 seconds. So is there like a 6-second intro, 6 seconds, you know, that I can build there? And then where does that go to? How does that build to the next step? Okay, that next step is another 10 seconds. And then we have that break I talked about. That 10 seconds brings it to that break. That's where we're gonna reveal the product or have a dramatic, you know, part happen. And then this, you know, after that break, the song kicks in and it brings us to like the end, or, you know, the last like 12 seconds of music with like the final hit of the song bringing up the end card. And so I actually think in that very specific, you know, timed out way. I'll build that on my timeline using little bits and pieces of that song, and then I build it visually. And when things don't work, I'll go back. But that's that's my process and how I put things together.
So let me ask you a question. If you're working mostly within the instrumental of the song, if you're finding something on Spotify, so let's say you find like a really cool song that you like, where do you get the instrumental version from?
You know, YouTube, song title, instrumental, rip it off YouTube. And
so this is a question I know the answer to. If it's not there, what happens?
If it's not there, what happens? I move on to a different song. I mean,
okay. So here's the message here. If you do not have instrumentals to your music, make them. Like it doesn't take, when you're making a record, it doesn't take a lot of extra effort to make them. And, you know, we're a distributor. Obviously, this is a message as well. Release your instrumentals, put them out in the world for Mike to find them. Because if he doesn't find them, you know, you might be the cool artist that Mike finds and likes and wants to put it in a spot. And if you can't find your instrumental mix, next, and you'll never know.
Or if I can't cut the good parts of the song that are just instrumental, or if the lyric, like sometimes lyrics get in the way. You know, honestly, lyrics sometimes do get in the way, or like there's a lyric I really like, but then it's followed by a lyric that would just be really inappropriate for an ad. And I can't cut it out. And, you know, I love the guitar hit that's under that lyric, but I can't use it. And, you know, I won't always discount a song because of that, but oftentimes like you're in a rush to get stuff in front of your client. And, you know, if a song's not working because of lyric, you move on, you find the next song that you think could work. And
I never tell people to write music in a certain way with sync in mind, but it doesn't hurt to not write a song a certain way with sync in mind. Meaning like, you know, if you're going to write a song with a really cool tag, like, you know, like I gotta have it, and then you just add like an extra word that makes no sense in the context of a commercial. You know, I gotta have it yesterday, and then like your song just doesn't really make any sense. And unless it could be edited in a nice way, it's just not gonna work. So, you know, I always tell people to sort of think in terms of can the like 1 second payoff of your song, can it help sell a thing?
Right.
That'll tell you whether or not.
And then also like if you give me the instrumentals, well, I can cut out that word that doesn't work, you know?
Right.
I have both, I can use it. But if I don't, if the instrumentals are nowhere to be found, it gets to be a problem. And yes, like if
I
it's
think it's cool also just to release instrumentals also because you make extra money from it, right? Like you put your instrumentals out on DSPs and like people might listen to them as like standalone pieces of music and might be cool for different things. What is the best use of music that you can think of in a commercial, and why does it work so well?
Well, I feel like best would be to like see it. You sent me this beforehand, and I could put some, or Carly, you want to put those two links in the chat?
Yeah, let me drop them right now.
So yeah, the first one is, it's sort of a, oh, that's the second one. Okay, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. The Adidas one, I mean, that's a pretty famous one, pretty famous recent one. But it's so good. I don't know if you all want to click on it and give it a look, or if you remember the spot, but I'll give you a second to do that. The Adidas one.
I'm watching.
Without exemption.
More. Much more than this.
I did it my way.
Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up.
Yeah, I'll elaborate. I think if you watch both of them, and I'll have you watch the Nike one after this, because it's also an amazing commercial. I think both of them, we talked about lyrics and how I don't use them so much. Both of these are lyrically driven spots, but that Adidas spot is incredible and takes a very, very well-known song and kind of uses it in a totally like new, modern kind of like, really punk rock way. I mean, it's a Frank Sinatra being turned into like total modern youth badass shoe culture. And yeah, and if you haven't yet, go check out the Nike one, which is, really repeats the same lyric over and over again, but the way that lyric is used, and it's sort of, goes against what you'd expect that lyric to be used as, is pretty awesome.
I got soul, but I'm not a soldier. I got soul, but I'm not a soldier. I got soul, but I'm not a soldier.
That nice build and the natural ending.
Oh yeah, it's got it all. And apart from the shots of Lance Armstrong and Oscar Pistorius, that didn't age so well. I mean, it's an epic spot that like, I think that was for the Olympics, and like it's just that the way that it uses that track and that lyric becomes so emotional and so like, it connects you with this imagery that's, wild and out there. And like, it's such a great, combination of that, that music is bringing you there. And then the visuals are, making you like, think about sport and think about, beyond sports, and it's It's really cool. And I'll admit that spot's cut by a mentor of mine, who is an amazing editor named Hank Corwin. He was my former boss in my last company. He just lost an Oscar for Don't Look Up, but maybe if you saw that movie and can remember all the like crazy cuts to like weird nature stuff in the middle of it, you might recognize some similar elements.
The thing I really dig about the Adidas spot also, I used to work for a company that pretty much had just this huge older catalog, and we were always sort of thinking about like how can these songs be sort of reused and reimagined. And for those who don't know how this works on the licensing end, anytime a piece of music is synced, you are licensing both the composition, the song itself, and then if you want, you can license the original recording, or you can create a new one. And this happens all the time in advertising, where you have either somebody using a cover or somebody create a new master, completely originally. It's pretty trendy these days to reinterpret a song, maybe to juxtapose it in a different way. Like Mike said, taking this sort of old swagger from Frank Sinatra and sort of reinventing it and reimagining it in this sort of like new, shoe culture kind of swagger. Sort of taking elements from one thing and maybe changing it or adapting it to something else is a really kind of cool thing that I think that there's lots of creative people like Mike and people at the agencies who are really trying to do things to impact culture with advertising. I think a lot of people don't give ads enough credit for being influential in this way. Like,
yeah, I mean, look, that Adidas spot, I can guarantee you that song was pitched to the brand from the get-go.
Yeah,
I think that spot probably, I know it aired first during the Grammys is my guess, is when it first aired, but I'm sure 6 months before those Grammys, they were like, we want to take Frank Sinatra's My Way and turn it into like a anthem for street culture. And, they probably made a pitch video and got like cool people to like say the lyrics on the street or something like that, and cut together a pitch with like cool people just saying the lyric or I don't know really what went behind the scenes, but that's how they probably sold something like that. And
yeah, I think if you work for a company that has like big influential famous copyrights, part of your job is figuring out ways to plug them into various types of culture. So that almost certainly, that I'm sure that originated from someone similar to like what I do, where it's just like, how do we figure out how to get My Way into the spot? Like, what's a creative idea, and how do we like take people out to lunch and pitch them, fun ideas for how to do that? If you are not a famous artist or work for a company that has famous catalog, and you're like an independent artist and you make stuff, you make music that kind of sounds like stuff that you're hearing in ads, what advice would you give, like an indie artist who, in a respectful, non-intrusive way wants to figure out how to sort of get their music in front of decision makers for ads?
I mean, as we said, release your instrumentals. That would be number one, because if people like your music and can find your music but can't figure out a way to fit it into their edit, they might skip over you. So that just seems like a no-brainer. But yeah, I mean, the biggest, I would say, like, have a passionate following or have friends in advertising. I mean, it does really come down to individuals who, like, especially like younger creatives who like to think of themselves as having great taste and wanting to share that taste with the world. I mean, you have to have a certain kind of ego to think like, I'm gonna call myself a creative, and that's my job description. And that with that, and I make fun of it, but like seriously, like with that comes the ability to influence culture and so like when I say have a passionate following, it's like you don't need to be a humongous artist to get your song in a commercial. You need to have a creative, like a 25-year-old creative at 72 and Sunny who's just been put on, a cool account that uses good music to be like, to his bosses, hey, you guys got to check out this band. I saw them open for whoever and they're awesome. We should consider using them. It's, that might seem obvious, but it really does make a huge difference. And then, we talked about like what makes a good track for use in advertising, but and you kind of touched on it, but like lyrically, like there are some things I think lyrically and even emotionally, there are some themes that are more universal or you find used more often, like celebrations of life, fun, things that can be, metaphors that can be interpreted as sort of like, enjoying the good life or whatever, are going to hit a lot of different brands, as will sort of like songs that have a sense of drama to them, but on the other side, like songs that feel serious and dramatic could be a good route to go, in terms of if you're thinking in that way of like what makes a good song for sync. But I mean, just having great music that gets people excited, that's
right. What about TikTok? Does this stuff kind of sort of filter and bubble up via TikTok in your world, or not really?
Like in what way? Like
things that are trending on TikTok. I mean, like in the music industry, like in the last year or two, it's become kind of a thing where A&Rs are paying attention to this, and TikTok kind of has its own impact on culture, and specifically, music driven kind of thing where it's like I saw that song, I don't even know, it's Love Montazzi in a spot, and that's like a big TikTok song. I hear it all the time.
No, I mean, I know what you mean, how like songs will go viral on TikTok and then a brand, I mean,
well, not just that they go viral, but just that, the way I think about it, because I mean, I'm not like huge into this part of the world in general. Like I'm not a big like TikTok user, but I think it kind of makes a little bit of sense also because you're working in like a micro medium, right? You're cutting these 30-second things, and TikTok videos are kind of the same thing. So if you have and those types of ingredients that make a good TikTok song is like what you have, like a really good payoff or something catchy or hooky that could be used over 700 different kinds of videos and make sense in context.
right.
You have a song that goes big, and then just like every video that has something big in it, uses that to. I think we should open it up to questions. Let me open up my thing here. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I think we covered everything that we could possibly cover.
Yeah, well, I hope you guys, I gave you a little bit of insight sort of behind the scenes of my world and how it intersects with your world. I think it
Did somebody just unmute? I hear somebody trying to ask a question.
Yeah, this is me, John. Hi, Mike. Hi, John.
Oh, hey, Guillermo.
Here. Hey, how are you doing? Well, I see that there are some questions on the chat side, but I also have one. Well, I don't know if we can read that one first. But mine here is, Mike, when you speak that you have like personal playlists with tracks you like, and thus I guess it's like content that it's not cleared. Is it your or Uppercut's job to find a way to clear it? Like, how do you manage to clear it? Also take into account like the short deadlines in the industry.
Ultimately, it's going to be the agency that does it. Interestingly, the company I now work for now, Uppercut, they have a sister company that's a music company that does, licensing, that does composition and stuff like that.
Clearances also, or no?
They will do, they will do clearances. But even so, it's like that would have to be arranged with the agency before they come to us. typically it's going to be the agency producer who is, you know, working with their business affairs people at the agency and going to the labels and working on it, working on clearing it. And, you know, it's always a bummer when it comes back, the price is too high, or, you know, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, it's not, that's not me. I'm just the guy who puts the song in there and then makes the agency fall in love with it, and then makes the brand fall in love with it, and then gets the brand to ultimately say, like, fine, we'll pay that extra. We'll pay that extra money.
Mike alluded to this earlier. That Mike and I have worked together a bunch over the years, and part of that is that he, you know, that I can provide him with music that is already cleared, which then makes him look like a hero if the music also works, because then they just talk to one person. I'm like very happy to do a deal with them. But I think that Mike also is at least somewhat aware that if he cuts, you know, like a Billie Eilish song into a spot, that like there's a chance she's just gonna say no, and you know, she has
Yeah,
to start over again.
You know, it's pretty rare. You know, I know I referenced some of the bigger tracks I've used in ads, but like it's pretty rare that happens. Honestly, that's like a 2-3 times a year type thing for me, that I get to use like really big known tracks or whatever. Much more typical is like smaller indie type stuff that, yeah, it's great when I get to work with John, because he's, you know, sort of has these deals with his artists that make him a one-stop shop. But even if it's someone else, it's like, you know, you always approach it from trying to make the best spot possible. But, you know, in the back of your head, you don't get dumb about it. You're not going to put a song, you know, that has, you know, 150 million plays on Spotify for, you know, for something that, you know, has a $15,000 or $20,000 music budget. Like, it's, you know, you're just not going to do that.
The other thing that someone like you would be aware of, but it also becomes a conflict, is you want to make sure that the song that you're using is not running in another spot, which I think is like another thing that comes up a lot. Oftentimes these deals are exclusive, meaning you have at least category exclusivity. So if you're doing a Nike spot, you can't do an Adidas spot with the same song.
Right.
So there was a question from the chat about is having a publisher an obstacle when trying to get a sync opportunity? It shouldn't be. It should be an asset. The publisher, part of their job is to help exploit your music, and publishers will typically have sync teams whose job it is to get your music synced. And I think that as long as it's the same thing like with a label. If you're a priority, if you're front of mind, if you have a relationship with them, you know, if they like you, if they like your music, if they're passionate about your stuff, as opposed to you just being another one of their, you know, millions of customers that or clients that that they may or may not even know about, you know, those things will define the difference of whether or not they'll be a help or a hindrance. If you have an admin deal with a company and you like, I think somebody needs to mute. I think somebody's making some noise on that. I don't know who that is. Anyway, if you have a publishing deal and it's just a situation where they're not doing anything to help the situation, and the clearances have to go through them, and you know they play hardball, you know, for a situation where you know they don't really have any justification to do that. Like if you're an independent artist and you have a song, you know, with 100,000 streams on Spotify, and you know Mike likes it, cuts into a spot, and goes to your publisher and says, hey, you know, we'd like to use this in a Nike ad, and they ask for, you know, $2.6 million, then and won't negotiate, you know, then they're not going to help your situation. I think the publishers are typically pretty good at this, and they use comps, you know, of other similar types of songs and recent licenses to get an idea of where to quote. But it can be problematic if, you know, your song has multiple publishers, because they all have to agree with each other on what the right fee is. And sometimes if it's a situation where the budget is not really generous, you know, if one of them doesn't say yes, it could be a problem. Mike, have you run into any issues with publishers, you know, in terms
of yeah, I mean, recently I did an ad, I mean, it was like think it was like a pretty local ad for a hospital chain down in the South. I mean, regional ad. And it was like a sponsorship with the Daytona 500.
Mhm.
And the team it was focusing on was actually like it's owned by Pitbull. So you know, everyone wanted to use a Pitbull song, and we cut it in there, and Pitbull was like, yeah, you can use it. You know, I'm fine. But there's like 10 publishers on this song. So you know, I can put in a good word and tell them they should just agree to whatever you say, but they're not, you know. And so it's like we had this spot cut, and I had to like sort of parallel path the whole time, cutting a spot that was library music and then cutting a spot that was using a Pitbull track. And of course, everyone was like, we want the Pitbull one. We don't like the
Right.
Well, yeah, of course, because it's Pitbull versus a library track.
Right.
And you know, luckily all the publishers kind of like, you know, respected Pitbull's wishes and agreed to a low fee. But like, yeah.
I will, just to give some background. I used to work at a publishing company, and I have a little bit of firsthand knowledge with this, you know, kind of behind the scenes. You know, when it comes to these types of situations, you know, again, the reason that you would have multiple publishers is because you have multiple writers, and each one of them, you know, represents a share of the composition, you know, for the song itself. And the more of them there are, the more of them, you know, the more problems there could be where if one of them doesn't agree. But generally speaking, I mean, they want to make these deals happen, and they're not trying to sort of mess around with things, but they also, you know, can't necessarily agree to things. In some cases, they need to get approvals from, you know, each individual artist or writer, depending on what the deal is. And those deals are all structured with different types of parameters. Like all these deals are kind of, they're not all custom, but they have different terms. So, you know, in one case, you could have 5 writers, and one of them can have approval rights, and he could hate the brand and just say no, and everybody's starting over. You know, it could also be a situation where if you have an admin deal, admin deals typically are, you know, they don't give you an advance or much of an advance. So they're really just kind of clearing it for you. You know, it's more a matter of like, you know, they'll come to you if you're fine with it, they'll say yes. But if you have a co-publishing deal where they co-own the rights and they gave you a boatload of money, and the money from this spot is like not enough for them, or they don't feel like it's a good deal, that's kind of where they'll start playing hardball and potentially jeopardize the deal just because they're trying to make their money back. So just, you know, there's different types of publishing deals, and I would be aware of, you know, how complicated is your situation and how much control do you have is probably more important than like, you know, in the grand scheme of things when it comes to a publisher. On the other side, it's the same thing with a label. You know, the more money a label puts in and the more ownership they have, the more say they have in whether these deals happen. But labels tend to be pretty chill. And I think part of it is because they know that we don't need them, right? So like if Mike cuts a spot with a really cool song, they could just make another recording of it
Right.
and use that instead. So there's always this kind of thing where I think labels tend to be like, you know, if we push too hard, they're gonna still use the song. They're just gonna make their own recording of it, and then they'll own it. You know, and they won't use it, and we won't get anything.
Right. Yeah, and as you said with the artists too, it's like you have to be aware of like what you're trying to put in what, like, you know, Radiohead's never gonna, even though creatives and editors are always gonna try to put Radiohead in ads, Radiohead's pretty much never going to agree to put their song in an ad. So
yeah. Okay, so Mike, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, and I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did, and yeah, thank you so much for your time, and we hope that we can put this on YouTube and that you're not embarrassed by it.
I hope so. I hope I'm not embarrassed too.
Thank you everybody for attending and for your questions, and yeah, thanks so much.
Right, thanks everyone.